don't think I need anything on here. While we're doing this, if you have any questions, feel free to speak up, and you don't need to hold your questions till the end. Feel free to ask them, as they come along, and we're gonna go through this, and we'll just take a couple minutes here, see if anybody else is gonna join us, and get started, so we can start talking about taxes. This is going to be what I'm calling the simple class. I've been teaching an EA class through the summer and into the fall. We're getting to the final part of that one. And I was actually using some of the stuff from those courses that I've put into this one to kind of help us get familiar with the tax rules for this upcoming year. If any of your clients are asking about, what are the new tax changes coming down? What are the new stuff? We've got a new president. What are the changes, right? Everybody wants to know what are the changes. There aren't any yet. That's the big thing. If they say, no tax on this or that, or no tax on, or whatever it is. Most of that stuff has not come down yet. There's been no changes in the tax law for this upcoming president. I do believe that at the end of 2025, there will be some big reforms, because the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to be expiring, and so that's. Because that was Trump's main thing. He's probably not going to let that expire, so he's going to refresh some of those things, but that will be where the changes happen.
They're going to find out.
Yeah, maybe he'll remove some of the credits that we're going to be talking about today, like the solar or the EV credits. Maybe not. We don't know. And so yeah, if anybody asks, hey, what are the new tax laws now that we've got a new president? Nothing's changed yet. Nothing's changed yet. So we're at 5:58. I'm going to try and keep an eye on my little meeting here to see if anybody else comes in. But let's get started with today's class. So as I've been talking about, today's tax class is just kind of our simple tax class. Anybody that has just gotten in, you can find these slides in the chat under that Google Drive. And so today we're going to be going over filing status, dependents, some credits, and deductions that you can take. I'm going to mute everybody here, and this will mute everyone.
Can you move your screen over?
Like that. All right, so I've muted everybody now. If you want to ask questions, just unmute yourself and feel free to speak up. And if unmuting doesn't work, put it in the chat and I'll fix that. But we're going to be talking about filing status, dependents, credits, and deductions today. This is part one of 2 courses, so we're not really going to be doing any business stuff, rental stuff, expenses today. That'll happen next week on the 10th. But today is going to be kind of the simple stuff, the real meat of when a client comes in, what can we help them with right off the bat. So the first thing is we've got the filing status. How should you file, or do you even need to file? Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is check if this person needs to file. Do they have more than or do they have less than $14,000 of wages? These are last year's 2023 standard deduction numbers. They have increased. So the standard deduction for a single person has gone up to $14,600, and doubling that for a married person is $29,200. So if a single person with less than $14,000 of wages come in, they may not need to file. They may not have a filing requirement. A married couple with less than $29,000 of wages, they may not have a filing requirement. Okay? However, they may still want to file because, here we go, we're letting people in here. You lobby, admit everybody. Come on in. Okay. Here we go. Fusayo, do you have your hand raised? Do you have a question? Maybe not. All right, let's keep going. Yes, Fusayo, yes. What? Can I unmute you? I don't know. Unmute. No, I can't seem to unmute you on my end. So we're gonna keep going. So we've got.
I do have questions.
Yes.
Sorry, where's the PDF?
It's gonna be in the chat function under the Google Drive.
Under the Google Drive.
Yep, in the chat function. Maybe it's not there for you. Let me copy and repaste it because you came in a little bit late.
Thank you.
Put that in there.
Yeah, I don't see it in the chat right now.
Copy, paste. There we go. All right.
Thank you.
So we've got if they got less than $14,000 of wages for a single person, they may not need to file, but they still may want to file if they're going to claim a dependent, if they're going to be able to get some credit, or even just to get their own withholding back. They might want to file just to get their withholding back, especially if they had some taxes taken out and they're under the standard deduction rate. Okay? Now, if somebody comes in and says, oh yeah, I started a business this year and I made $600, $700. Well, that is not wages. Now they do have a filing requirement. It says as little as $400. Technically, it's $400 of net. However, if there's more than $600 of gross income, it may have been reported to the IRS, and you may need to file just to straighten all that out. The long and the short of it is, if they've got a business, they pretty much need to file. Okay? Retirement is not wages. So you may have somebody that has more than $14,000 of a little bit of Social Security, a little bit of pension. They may still not have a filing requirement if their total income plus half of their Social Security is less than 25 grand. Social Security doesn't even kick in, and so it may not be taxable. But just be aware, if you do have a taxpayer with retirement income, that sometimes that $14,000 is not always an end-all be-all. Okay. Also, a dependent. Okay. Like we've got students. We've got plenty of parents that ask us to file their kids' return because their child is a student. That child may not have a filing requirement, but may still want to file to get their withholding. Yeah. As a dependent, they really wouldn't get any credits, but they could definitely get their withholding back, any money they paid in. Okay. A dependent, like this student, a dependent will get a standard deduction up to $400 more than their earned income. I did say just the word income here. It is earned income. So if they've got wages and like stocks and bonds and stuff, they may only have a standard deduction up to their wages, $400 more than their wages. But if they then have another couple $1,000s of stocks or interest, they may have some tax liability, even if that total was less than $14,000. So that's some stuff here of who needs to file. Okay. So once you determine that they do need to file because they've got more than $14,000 of income, we need to figure out: are they single? Are they married filing joint? Married filing separately? Head of household, or qualified surviving spouse. Those are the only 5 filing status. I know that all of the preparers that have been working with me for years and years, they know those 5. They can rattle those guys off. But you new guys, these are the only 5 filing status that the IRS accepts. As a general rule, it's not perfect for everybody, but as a general rule, married filing joint is generally the best option, and married filing separately is generally the worst option. Now, I have had clients that want to file married filing separate for non-tax reasons. The big one is going to be income-based repayment. You've got, a former student or even a current student married to a high earner. If that student is on income-based repayment, it may cost them $2,000 or $3,000 more in taxes to file separately, but it might save them $10,000 or $15,000 in minimum monthly payments on student loans. So there are some times where married filing separately is a better option, not just because of the taxes. Some things about married filing joint is that tax liability on there is owed wholly by each person. It's not half and half. Each person in married filing joint owes that whole amount. Okay? When you go married filing separate, you have two separate returns, and each party only owes their respective amounts. Okay? And so those are the 5 filing statuses that that you can pick for the IRS. Let's dig into these guys a little bit more. For a single, this is going to be the default filing status if you don't qualify for another one. Okay, you must be unmarried, and so married. For I know that all of my preparers know this, but for you new guys, if you are married on December 31st or earlier at any point during the year, you are married for the entire year. Works the same thing with the divorce. If you sign that divorce paperwork and are legally separated from your spouse under a divorce decree or separation decree before December 31st, on or before December 31st, you're considered unmarried for the entire year. You're either going to fall into the single status, or you may be able to pick head of household. And any questions on that? Getting married any point in the year, you're considered married. Okay? You get married on January 1st of the next tax year, you are not considered married for that tax return you're going to be filing in 4 months before April 15th. Okay? All right. So, the single has lower limits on phase outs and half the standard deduction. A lot of the times when you see a single status, their phase outs, their things like that are going to be generally half of the married. It doesn't always hold up true, but generally the income limitations for a single person are generally half that of a married filing joint couple. Okay? It also has a higher tax rate. You get into higher rates quicker as a single filer and then as a joint filer or head of household. Okay. However, as a single filer, you're only going to be concerned with your own income, and you get the full access to any credits that you qualify for. You don't have to try and figure out, am I splitting the credits or anything with anybody else? Of course, you do have to be subject to income limits, and we'll get to those when we get to our credits section. Any questions on single? I think this is kind of the straightforward filing status. This is kind of the default. Okay, now we've got married filing joint. I'm going to say it again. I generally consider this the best filing status. Okay, if you get married at any point during the year, just as I talked about, and single, you're considered joint all year long. And if your spouse passes away during the year, okay, you may choose to file a married filing joint return. The only caveat on that one is you must have been able to qualify as joint the preceding year. Okay, the only time I can think of this coming into play would be a couple that got married in the beginning of the tax year and the spouse passed away. You may not be able to file joint in that situation, but you do not have to have filed joint in the prior year to get to take the election in the year the spouse dies. Okay, you just have to have had that option to file joint. Okay, you're married all year long if you're married on the last day of the year. Okay, and the married filing joint deduction is 2 times the single on your income limitations, on your standard deductions, on things like that. Okay. One thing that here in Hawaii we see a lot is going to be marriages that happen outside of the United States of America. As long as the marriage was legal in the place that it took place, it is considered a legal and binding marriage here. Now, we deal with a lot of Chukis clients, and they may have gotten married somewhere where they did not have a marriage certificate. They don't have any marriage paperwork. Okay? They are still considered married if it was legal in the place that the marriage happened. But if they need to prove things like that, it's going to be more difficult. A lot of the times, we try to have them go back to the pastor that performed the ceremony and have them sign a letter saying that they performed the ceremony and it was a legal wedding where it was performed. Most of the time, the IRS does not dispute a marriage unless there are some facts and circumstances that come to their attention. The IRS itself isn't going to go digging around for your marriage certificate unless something else comes up. But we still do want to ask our taxpayers. I know that my dad, one of his regular retorts when he's talking to a client is, "Oh, are you still married to the same wife, and are you still have the same kids and all that kind of stuff?" So just making sure that their family status hasn't changed year over year. Okay, so that's married filing joint. I think that's another simple one. They're filing as a couple. It is one unit. You add everything together. You add the incomes together. You add the withholdings together. Okay, and you take everything as a joint unit, and you only file one return for a joint return for both people. I mean, I know all of my tax preparers know this, but for you new guys. All right. They also have married filing separately. I generally consider this the worst filing status. You're only going to, if you are married during the year and you cannot claim considered unmarried, you can't claim head of household, maybe because you don't have a dependent, you are forced into the married filing separate section, filing status. If you are married and you don't have a way to be considered unmarried, you don't fit that head of household or maybe qualified surviving spouse, you don't fit that, you are forced into the married filing separate, and this comes with a lot of drawbacks. Married filing separately, okay, has a lot of credit limitations. Okay, the married filing separate really doesn't get any of the credits past the child tax credit. A married filing separate individual can definitely get the child tax credit, and which we'll go over in the credit section a little bit later. They can get that during the year, but they will not be eligible for earned income tax credit, American Opportunity Tax Credit. I also don't believe they can get the lifetime learners credit. Their capital losses are cut in half. They can't take $3,000 per year. They can only take $1,500. And if one of the spouses itemize, both must itemize. So that is the kicker. That is usually the one that people forget about on a married filing separate return, because generally on a married filing separate return, you're only talking to one of the spouses. So you're going to ask your client, well, did your spouse itemize, or did your spouse take the standard deduction? And they're probably not going to know. And so what you have to do at that point is you try to, first see if you can, figure it out with a conversation with the taxpayer. Does your spouse own a home? Does your spouse, you talk through that with them. Do they have large medical expenses? Like we're going to talk about an itemized deduction. Is there a reason for the other spouse to itemize? And if there is, you may want to play it safe and itemize unless the taxpayer can show you something that their spouse is going to take the standard. So if both spouses can take the standard, and it is a single standard deduction, it's not the joint standard deduction. They would each get their single standard deduction, not get to take any credits other than their kids' credits, and if they both take the standard, they can both do that. Otherwise, if one of them is going to itemize, they both need to itemize. Okay, but that's sometimes hard to get out of your client, especially if they say, I don't know what they're doing. I don't have any idea what they're doing. And so what you want to do is you want to talk with them through it and see, is there any reason for the other party to itemize? With these higher standard deductions at $14,000 for a single person, there may not be, even with a mortgage. But if they start saying things like, yes, the other party pays for a mortgage, the other spouse, has property taxes, or has a high-paying job that has large withholding, they might be itemizing, and it would be, probably the right thing to do to file an itemized form for the taxpayer sitting in front of you, even if that's going to cost them some taxes because they can't take the standard deduction. Okay, but to keep them on the right side so they don't later get hit with a bill from the IRS saying, "Hey, we noticed that your spouse took the standard, your spouse took itemized. You also need to itemize," and they remove a $14,000 standard deduction. So that's the main kicker of married filing separately, is that standard versus itemized deduction. It doesn't help that there's no good credits allowed either. Okay. Now we've got head of household. You guys online are probably not going to be able to read this. Lima, I don't even know if you can read this. It's a little bit blurry. But this is table 2-1 for a qualifying person for head of household. All the employees are going to know that we get this out of the Pub 17 or our tax book. This little table here is really great about walking you through, is this person that is this client that you're talking to head of household. So we know that they have to be unmarried or considered unmarried. We talked about that before. So what is considered unmarried? This is a little bit tedious, but you file a separate return from your spouse. So if you are married, to be considered unmarried, you have to file a separate return. That makes sense. You have to pay more than half the cost of the upkeep of a home. Sometimes that's hard if they're living with other family members. If they're just living on their own with their kids, easy. You're done, right? The spouse, if they are married and they want to be considered unmarried, the spouse cannot live with you for any time in the last 6 months. Sometimes it's heartbreaking where you see, a couple that's separating, a couple that's separating, they are married, and, one of the spouses just walked out the door in November, in September, right? That, and they're gone. They're out of the picture. You're seeing them in April, and it's been 6 months that he's been that the other spouse has been out of the picture, but for that part of the year, they would not qualify as head of household if they were still married at the end of the year, because they did live with each other in the last 6 months of the year. Okay, the home was the main home of a qualifying person, so your qualifying child has to live with you, or qualifying relative. It doesn't have to be a qualifying child. We'll get to dependents in a little bit here. But to be head of household, the dependent that you're claiming also has to be in the home with you, and you must be able to claim this qualifying person. Okay, paying more than half the upkeep of the home out here in Hawaii, I call that rent. Are you paying more than half the rent? Let's see here. I got somebody else that wants to come in. Let's see if I can let them in here. All right, so that's all right. So on head of household, paid more than half of the upkeep of the cost of the home. So, what is upkeep of the home? We're talking about rent. We're talking about utilities. We're talking about food eaten in the home. Those are going to be the main ones. Okay. If you've got a multifamily residence and there is you know, more than more than two people paying the cost of the upkeep of the home. You've got 3 or 4 people all providing. You may not have any one person that can be head of household on that in that property, and generally you can generally get there if you really work with them, but maybe not. Maybe you do have 4 more people all paying a quarter of the upkeep of the home. If this is a dormitory style, not one big family unit, but if it is dormitory style where it's common living room, but your room is your room and can't be accessed by the other members of the household, you have a case here. But the other members of the household better not be family members, right? You're not going to say that, oh, this is my room, but my dad and my brother and my uncle, who all are helping support, they can't come into my room. Well, I think dad would see it different. Okay. Now, but like I was saying, if you do I have had clients that live in a little bit more dormitory style housing, big house, 5 or 6 rooms, common kitchen, and each person just rents out their one room. I have done head of household for a mother and a daughter renting a single room, and they had the documents to show, they're renting one room in this house, and they had the documents for what they were doing. Okay, if it is close with a couple that is not married, and maybe a couple that with a woman that has a child, not the child of the boyfriend in this relationship, and they're pretty close, we'd want to try and have the mom of the child try and have them, if we can make it work, see if we can have them paying more than half the rent, because that would allow them to claim that head of household, right? But if it's really off, if one is making in this case the boyfriend, who's not related to the young child, is making double or triple, it's really going to be 2 single people. Nobody in that home will get to go head of household. Maybe if the girlfriend's child qualified as a qualifying relative, only a $500 credit, but would allow boyfriend in this case to claim head of household, probably not as good as mom just taking her own child and getting the additional child tax credit or child tax credit, whatever that is. So this head of household, also down here, this is going to be the first time but not the last time, you're seeing due diligence. So our software Drake that we use has some due diligence spots, as well as at the bottom of the head of household calculator has a spot where you can kind of work through what is the total expense of the home and what is our taxpayer providing, so we can kind of break down and show, yes, they are paying more than half. Okay, we've got our qualifying surviving spouse. This has changed from qualifying widow or widower. It's just got a new name, but all the same things. The qualifying surviving spouse is really to let a spouse or a taxpayer whose spouse has passed away still get the married filing joint benefits for 2 years past the death of the taxpayer. Now, we did talk about before that if the taxpayer dies, the spouse can claim married in that year. We talked about that in married filing joint. But for the following 2 years, if they have a child, they can claim in the dependent. And this is not a qualifying relative. It must be their son, daughter, stepchild, or adopted child. It cannot be nieces, nephews, grandkids. For the qualifying surviving spouse, it needs to be their son or daughter, stepchild, or adopted child. And they can do that for 2 years past the year of death. Okay? 2 years following the year of death. So long as they're not remarried. If they remarried, they'd start filing joint with their new spouse. Okay? And you still need to pay more than half the cost of upkeeping a home. That's a little bit of a sticky one. But, so far I've not seen that part hold anybody back. Usually for me, the qualifying surviving spouse, their biggest thing is they're generally not claiming a young child. They're generally not claiming their son or daughter. And so they don't get to take the qualifying surviving spouse. Okay, let's see here. So these are the 5 filing statuses. Does anybody have any questions on these guys? Again, it's single, married filing joint. That's the best one. Married filing separately. That's the worst one. Head of household and qualifying surviving spouse. The 5 filing statuses, pretty straightforward as far as what they are. Definitely the 2 that if you wanted to do any more, looking at would be married filing separately to dig into what is not allowed when married filing separately, and then head of household just to kind of really dig in. Again, that table 2-1, this is in the Pub 17, but we also have it in our tax books. This is a really good table that you can walk through and see. And it says things like qualifying relative, who is your father or mother. You can claim that person as a dependent. That would be a qualifying person for the head of household test, right? If you're claiming a child, a qualifying child, and that child is single, that's a qualifying person for head of household. Now, this doesn't yet tell you about the test about support, but it's who is a qualifying person for head of household. Really good table there on 2-1. So, moving on to dependents. This is a really good section coming off of those filing statuses. So,